Hello everybody and welcome to episode 112 of the Melbourne AWS user group. And I know I've said this a few times before, but hopefully this is the last one we have to do virtually. With the government removing the work from home recommendations and most mask situations going away indoor, we feel like there's a pretty reasonable chance that we will be back in person this time next month. Venue is to be determined. Our usual venue is keen to have us back, but unfortunately does not have availability on that date. But as soon as we know when and where we're going to be, we'll let everybody know. But for tonight, we've got four lightning talks lined up. It's a jam-packed night, so we'll get straight into it. Now, I've always tricked myself. Which way are my slides going to go this time? That way. No, that way. Here we go. So, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Melbourne AWS user group acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So on tonight's agenda, we've got the introductions. I can never do this. You'd think after 2 years I'd be able to do this, right? Introductions, yay! Straight up after the introductions, we've got Ian and Matt will be taking us through what's new in AWS in the last month. And then, as mentioned, we have 4 lightning talks lined up and ready to go. I'll detail who they are in the next slide. And then roughly around 5 to 8, we will be wrapping up. And there may or may not be a post-stream Zoom catch-up. I believe a few people have to run off straight after this or during this. But we'll see how we go. If there is one, it will be posted in the Slack channel. So our presentations tonight, and this is not in the running order. This is just in the order that they were on the website, I believe. So slightly differently as we'll go through. But we have WAR, what is it good for? From Jason. We have CDK in a nutshell from Boyan. Light sail useful? ? From Michaela, and AWS Migration Readiness Overview from James. As mentioned, they'll run in a little bit different order. I believe we're going to do the going war, what is it good for with Jason first, and then we're doing the AWS Migration Readiness Overview, and then Light Sail Useful, and then CDK in a nutshell. I think that's right. We'll see who shows up as we go through it. No, it'll be fine. If this is your first time around here, welcome along. There's a couple of places where you can ask questions. Normally we would do a Q&A session at the end of each presentation, but given we have 4 lightning talks to squeeze in, we're going to omit that one for tonight. But you can ask your questions in Slack. Most of our presenters are in Slack. But the place most people ask questions these days are right there in the chat on YouTube. And either our presenters will be around or there'll be other people around who'll be able to answer any questions you might have. Likewise, we welcome feedback at all times via those same channels. If you have any thoughts or if you have any venue ideas, it would be good as well. In the Melbourne channel on Slack, 3 years and I still can't do this. In the Melbourne channel on Slack, or in the YouTube chat. We would be remiss if we did not mention our sponsors, because they've stood by us in various shapes, sizes, and timeframes over the last 2 years during this pandemic, and we really couldn't be putting these events on without them. So our gold sponsor is CMD, and our 2 silver sponsors, Versant and Civo. They'll be particularly important next month when we can actually start spending some money again and putting catering on. I have to figure out how to do catering again now that I've forgotten, but I'm sure it'll come back to us. So a little bit about who we are before we break to the next segment. My name is Rob. I'm @Bok on Slack, and I'm @Bok_ or dash or whatever on most social media platforms. I'm using this hand, shouldn't I? Yeah. So you can usually find me around there. And my co-host, who you'll meet in just a moment in the new segment, is Ian. We don't work for AWS. I don't think anybody involved tonight works with AWS. We're a community of people who work in AWS, in and around AWS. AWS is our day job. Same it is probably for most of you. But yeah, so we're a community for the community by the community, and we're very proudly independent in that way. As mentioned several times already, our Slack channel or Slack team is the best way to keep in touch and to engage with the rest of the community. There is about 800 or so people on there. I never looked this up before I go in. 872 people on the Slack team, and they're active at various points. It's a great place to ask questions if you have questions or you need help with anything. And there's a bunch of channels to just talk about various topics, various times, those sorts of things. But there are other ways to get involved. We are always looking for speakers. Putting these events on, the hardest thing is finding speakers. And the hardest thing is not taking the content that, AWS provides or some other big players provides. Because you can see that anywhere. This is our Melbourne community content, our Melbourne community people speaking. So if you have something you'd love to talk about, or if you need some help to put your presentation together, and if you want someone to review your slides or to propose topics or those sorts of things, jump on the Slack and talk to us about it. We're more than happy to help out. Not looking for sponsors just yet, but this year, if we are back in person for the bulk of this year, we definitely will be looking for sponsors soon. And next month, we definitely will be looking for volunteers as well. Putting these events on is quite labor intensive, so more hands is good. More hands is better. There's a volunteers channel on Slack that you can join, or just chat anywhere on Slack. Slack is the place to be. And I think that's all of my slides that I have. Yep, back at the beginning. So with that said, let's switch over to our What's New in AWS segment.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to, as Rob said, hopefully the last time we have to do this completely virtual. With a jam-packed evening, not going to take up a lot of your time with unnecessary talk, but I do want to show Matt, of course. Hello, Matt. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Hello. Pleasure.
Cool. That's a very enthusiastic hello. But let's have a look at what's finally in Sydney this month. So what we got around this time is Resilience Hub, which is I always forget about, I always stumble over it. I believe it is a DR service to make things easier in that regard.
Yeah. Does anybody use this service? I've had a chance to have a brief look at it, but yeah, I guess now that it's in Sydney, I'll take another swing.
Yeah, it's a bit the same for me. On the other hand, we did get confirmation this month on where the local zones are coming. So at reInvent, there was announced that we had a local zone coming to Australia. And by now it has been announced where they're coming. So that is in Perth, Brisbane and Auckland. Technically, Auckland isn't part of Australia, of course. But the Auckland local zone will be part of the Sydney region. So I don't know if that means it's sort of like taking over New Zealand, and they'll gain their independence in 2 years when they get their own region. But it's good to know that they're coming, where they're coming, and personally I'm looking forward to being able to play with them and see what they're useful for.
I think this is the big announcement from the month. I've already spoken to a lot of people that are very keen to start deploying things in Perth with a vengeance. The question on I think a lot of people's minds will be, when/if RDS comes to more local zones other than LA.
Yeah,
But time will tell. Time will.
Yeah. Speaking of the Perth one, though, we have some idea at least of when that will come out, because that one will be managed by the Melbourne region. So we know that it is coming after we've got the Melbourne region. When that is coming, that is still second half of the year, so not much info on that. But let's move on to serverless.
Favorite topic.
Yep, so it's always fun. And this actually has a pretty good announcement here for step functions, which adds mocking support. This allows you to more easily test your step functions locally, which is great, of course, because it's a bit exhausting to have to do everything in the up in the clouds and see if it works or not. Have you had a chance to play with this, Matt?
I took a chance. I attempted to have a look at it and then got very, very sidetracked. I think the big one on my mind is with the ability to mock pretty much everything that you're likely to use with step functions. Hopefully, will encourage a lot more people to build some more durable testing around their step functions. So I hope to have a chance to play with it and report back very soon. Maybe there's a talk in there somewhere.
That will definitely be an interesting talk. Cool. The other serverless announcement is great if you use Kafka, but otherwise not very interesting. So let's move on to containers. AppRunner has VPC support, so this means that you can finally use AppRunner and have it call things within your VPC. So if you remember, AppRunner is a sort of managed service, a bit like Beanstalk almost, but for containers, or purely for containers. But it was always running outside of a VPC, so you couldn't really make your containers connect to an RDS, for example. So that has now been solved, which is good. Other things here are really CloudMap API supports IPv6, which follows on all the IPv6 announcements we've had the past months. And so AWS is moving forward with that quite heavily. But then we'll come to DevOps, where there's actually a really interesting announcement as well. CloudFormation hooks. What this allows you to do is basically run things like validation at the account and region level for your CloudFormation. So you can set something up, and every CloudFormation deployment you do will go through that hook, which can then prevent it from running, for example, if it doesn't have the right security measures in them. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to play with it. Matt, have you?
I have. I've given it an initial test, and I think for most use cases, it's looking pretty good. Definitely for some initial testing and validation, I think that this is going to really make getting your deployment pipelines and your CI a little bit more resilient, shall we say. So I think we will see a lot more coming out of AWS around this sort of stuff in the future, or at least I hope so.
Yeah, it's definitely something that a lot of us have been hoping for to see this. because we've all built a fair share of things inside our pipelines, but that doesn't actually help if somebody bypasses the pipeline or forgets to include things or things like that. In this way, it is managed
Covers all
centrally.
your bases.
Yeah. So that's great. Anything you want to discuss from here, Matt, before we move on?
Look, the code guru stuff is interesting. It would have been nice if we could detect the log4j problem before we all lost weeks of our lives. Live and learn, I guess. But the fact that the detector library and that is now is out, hopefully. Again, we look at code guru. You look at some of the other ML based stuff. Again, it's going to be another area that there's going to be a lot of focus on going forward. So it's good to see the service expanding. It's good to see them adding more features. But yeah, the point of the whole thing is to try and get these things before they become a problem. Yeah, hopefully he gets it next time.
Well, and then we can all point at people who aren't using the tools.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of security, also several announcements here. For those of us who have to deal with more regulated environments, it's probably good to know that AWS single sign-on is now IRAP compliant and protected status, which basically means that you're allowed to use it when you need to follow certain Australian regulations, which is nice. And
it's another tick box.
Yeah. Secrets manager rotation windows are exactly what it says. You can now set windows for your automated rotations for secret manager, during which it will do it. This, of course, assumes you have secret manager set up to automatically rotate, which generally involves having a LAMP function do that work for you, which is quite useful, especially around things like database passwords. Anything else you wanted to mention here, Matt?
Look, the one that sort of, it again, much like the code guru stuff, it's good to see Security Hub getting some more controls. This month was primarily open search, a couple of VPC and S3 things, but it's a good reminder for people who are using Security Hub to just make sure that you're consuming those and making sure that everything's all up to date, and that you're adding the relevant rules and controls in. It's probably something that I know I'm guilty of setting up Security Hub and then not going back and uplifting it over time. It's a good chance for us all to sort of take that action.
And Security Hub basically seems to introduce new controls every month or so. So it's always something to keep you busy. But as you said, Matt, it is very useful to see. So that brings us to other cool stuff, which is quite a couple of interesting ones. I can tell you what my favorite is on this list, which is the managed prefix list for CloudFront, which seems like a very, very small thing. But if you've ever had to set up all the Lambda functions to keep the CloudFront IPs up to date for your security groups that are fronted by CloudFront, you'll know that having that all managed for you is so much better.
It's not one of those things you realize is painful until you go to do it. Whitelisting IP sounds easy, but not at cloud scale.
Exactly, because for those of you who've never had to deal with this, the CloudFront IPs more or less seem to change, well, not quite on a daily basis, but it might as well be. So the old way of doing this was having a Lambda function that got triggered whenever the official list of IPs got updated for CloudFront, and then your Lambda function would update your security group. If you were managing your security group through something like CloudFormation or Terraform, that meant it was basically always out of date as well, which is an extra bit of fun there. But now that's no longer an issue. The rest here is really nice as well. So S3 backup is GA. So this is the backup solution for S3 that was announced at reInvent. And it went GA within 2 months, which is really amazing, to be honest. So this works through AWS backup, and you can automatically have your S3 buckets backed up to another bucket in a different region, different account, things like that. Also on the EFS side, it's been really nice. So first we got replication, which is the ability to replicate everything on your EFS to a different region or account again. There's a bit of a lag here, so it's not really for, or it's also not active application, but it's nice to have the ability for a DR environment because it's better than dealing with backups that might be a couple hours old. But most importantly, on the EFS side is the read latency improvement. So EFS has gotten faster, and it didn't cost any of us anything. You don't have to do anything for it. It's just there. So it's not the transfer speed that's sped up, but how fast it can find your files and things like that, which is great. Did you want to talk about the billing stuff, Matt? Or?
Yeah, so the two bits for me on this page is so we had an announcement the other day around the auto adjusting budgets. Cost management's always a front of mind thing when you're running in the public cloud. Auto adjusting budgets now gives us the ability to have our cost budgets automatically adjust, as one would think, given the name, based on the historical spend and the historical budget of the account. So nice way to keep your budgets in line and up to date with what's going on in your account. The only other one I had is if there's anybody from AWS watching this, can we stop adding letters to instance names, please? An X2IEZN. Yeah, I lost track of instance names probably 2 years ago. Or you just keep the documentation open all day. It's getting a little crazy.
It is. I don't even want to know. It gets harder to pronounce them as well this way.
Yeah.
And these ones are just, well, pretty crazy. Cool. And then with that, I think that is what we've got for the news. One last thing. You may know that a lot of times this new section was done with Guy Morton. Guy has moved on to the big cloud in the sky, or well, AWS. So he is no longer allowed to speak in public And as Rob said, we wouldn't want him here anymore anyway. Just kidding. But with his leaving, reached out to several people, so we'll have a more rotating cast of people with whom the news will be done. So next month you'll again see somebody else, and we'll keep on rotating through a number of people. And the same, of course, goes for the podcast. We'll record the podcast for February once February is actually over. In the meantime, surprisingly, all previous episodes are available. So if you want to catch up on any of the news, have a listen and enjoy it. And with that, I think we'll move on to the main points of the evening, which is our speakers. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you very much, Matt. Just a point of clarification there. Guy did not die. He's just gone to work for AWS. Close enough to being dead to us, but no. No, we wish Guy all the best. Thank you very much for being a part of our live streamed events for the last couple of years, and everything you've done before that. I know we'll still see you around, and it'll be good times. All right, so moving on to our first speaker for tonight, which I believe is Jason. Jason, if you're able to share your screen for me. Awesome. All right, let me switch over for now, and we'll get started. So just a reminder, Jason's talking about WAR, or WAR. What is it good for?
Hey everyone. So yeah, my lightning talk is on war. What is it good for? Couldn't really pass up that title. So let's get into things. And a little bit about me. Got a few AWS certs. Currently working for Telstra Purple, and I've had a long time experience as a Unix sysadmin. Been doing AWS for about 4 years now. While I've mainly been in the ops space, I've recently done a few well-architected reviews and thought give a little quick talk about those. Obviously, being a lightning talk, I won't be going too into depth, but give you a bit of a view on what a well-architected review and framework is. So, what is the WAR? It was developed using years of AWS's experience and working internally and with their customers. It's sort of really about doing a best practice for various workloads in your environment. Now, the big thing that might get people is, they hear AWS well-architected review and think, yep, it's technical. Let's get all our tech people in. It'll be great. It's actually surprising that there's a whole lot of business type questions involved there. So, when you go in to do a well-architected review, make sure you get some business people in. If you just have techies, it's going to be a whole lot of head scratching for a bunch of them. Now, the best practices, they've broken down into, traditionally it was 5 pillars. They just added a new one. And there are 4 lenses now to the well-architected review. The main one being the base framework itself, and a couple of others. How you go about that is there is a well-architected tool that you can get. So just jump into the console now, and you can see that tool, and that'll bring you in. Historically, that used to just be you go onto the website, find the docs, and you download that and have to go through it all manually. Pain in the ass. But if you go and have a look at the well-architected framework on the in the AWS website, you'll see there's also a whole lot of other lenses based around tools like SAP and things like that. So while the tool has these lenses, 4 lenses that will take you through, there are some other ones if that's relevant. So don't just look at the tool, also have a squiz at the website. So what are the pillars? The traditional 5 pillars were operational excellence, so how you run your workloads well. Security, that's pretty self-explanatory, how you protect your workload, and the assets and data within that workload. Reliability, how well does your workload perform the function, and the consistency is sort of a key part there as well. Performance efficiently, how does your workload use those resources? Has it cost optimization? It's fairly self-explanatory there. And then you've got the new one, which was announced at reInvent last year, on sustainability. So, one of the key things that you'll sort of see there as well is it's talking about workloads. So, while there is your AWS platform, there'll be things like your VPCs and so forth that are going to be common across all your workloads. One of the things that the well-architected review is sort of designed to focus on a particular workload. So, an application, something, not, everything in your environment at once, although it can be fine for small ones. So, and then, as I said, there's also the lenses. So, the basic one is the foundation, which is what most people will use. But, if your environment is predominantly serverless, or maybe you're running a SaaS-based application for your customers, you'll jump onto one of those lenses, and that will sort of focus the questions a bit more into those type of environments that you're running. So what do the questions look like? This one here that I brought up, I chose this one specifically. Well, it's the first one that you get to in the operational excellence question 1, but also it really sort of highlights that there is a lot of business type questions. You look at this and it's really not a tech question at all. So that's probably one of the sort of the big things when I first started doing this was that realization that's not just technical. Get your business people involved, and it's about uplifting your business and how you're doing things, not just technically, but getting that focus holistically. And one of the things as well that you'll come across, sometimes you'll be going through and you'll get to a new pillar and you'll go, hey, didn't they ask that question before? That's one of the things. There are going to be similar questions across the pillars, but with a slightly different focus. So, have a look at the question and see, what is the pillar asking for this one? And one of the big things as well is, the well-architected framework and the review is there to sort of find out where are you at and how can you improve. So, it's fine not to be compliant in certain things. It's okay if you see lots of big red crosses all over the place. That's normal, and you'll see lots of what AWS call their high-risk items as you go through. So the questions, you've got the main question itself, and then within that is the actual items that you check off to evaluate how you're doing within that general question. but not all those questions are necessarily going to be relevant for you. So you have some options here. You'll see right here you've got this big check, or tick, well, not tick box, slider, to mark the entire question as not relevant. But, and I unfortunately cut most of this off on the clip. Right down here you can see mark best practices that don't apply. So maybe the question itself is relevant, but not all of these items will be. And so you can mark those off as not being relevant. So when AWS, when you save it and the tool has a look to see, is this a high risk item? So maybe, you've only got one or two things checked off or none. Is this a medium risk item? Maybe you've got most things checked off, but there's a couple that you're missing. Marking those that are not relevant can help, make the difference from a high risk item to a medium risk item for things that just, don't relate to that particular workload. So who can run a well-architected review? As we said, the tool is there, it's in your console. You can jump in and run this yourself. The well-architected tool has the questions in there, obviously, but let me jump back for a sec. You'll see they've got these info sections here and here and here, and you can click on those to open up some information around that question and that item on how to do it. But ideally, you can also get in touch with an AWS WellArchitected partner, and these guys have gone through, they've done some training and have the idea and the knowledge on what is this question really meaning. So to wrap all this up, the well-architected review, it's a guide for best practices running your workloads in AWS, and there's a tool there to help you through. So yeah, that's me, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason. That was awesome. I don't do enough well-architected reviews. Definitely not. It's actually been 12 months or so since I did one last time. It was an awesome refresher. Thank you very much for that. Next up, we have James, I believe. James, if you're able to share your screen for me, and we'll switch over. All right, I can see James is ready. James is going to take us through the migration readiness assessment overview. So I'll throw it over to James now.
Well, awesome. Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. My name is James Wynn. I'm a principal consultant at CMD. I've been working, I suppose, with AWS and a lot of different customers for a number of years now. And one of the big projects, or a lot of the big projects that I've been involved in, is customers migrating to AWS. I've been working, I think, various different levels of customers now, from different cloud adoption strategies for the past 6 years. I've seen migrations go well. I've also seen migrations go bad, and everything in between. So I thought I'd just do a quick presentation around the AWS Migration Readiness Assessment. So I guess we'll start off with, what what does make a successful migration, or what elements? Look, starting from the top, executive sponsorship. Now, this is very important. I've seen this in the past where you have different IT departments or heads of IT that really want to move to the cloud, adopt the cloud, adopt AWS, all the great technologies that are available, but they haven't got that executive sponsorship yet. That was very much true in the early days, I suppose, where companies, a lot of large organisations, and company really hadn't got to that point of that cloud adoption where it was normal. Whereas I think these days it's a lot easier to convince the executive sponsors because it's much more of a normal migration or transition these days. But really having that that executive sponsorship on board, it's really giving that clarity on purpose and why the business, aligning not only the technical objectives but business outcomes as well. Cloud first strategy, of course, looking at not just migrations but looking for new technologies, new applications, etc. Giving that cloud first strategy really gives that clear vision, and it helps to motivate people as well around being able to move to the cloud, looking to improve budgets, investments, also the ability to be able to have access to a lot of different technologies, a lot of different services and compute power as well that might not have been achievable for organisations. Organisation change. Again, this is around really adopting the cloud, adopting your migration process, getting that training involved early, really looking at compliance, and really building those new operational models around cloud. Adoption roadmap, again, there's a fine line between taking the big bang or but you don't want to go big bang. You don't want to just say, right, we're cutting everything over this weekend. But at the same time, you don't want to take 3 years, down that path. So it's about starting small, being able to migrate those sort of low-hanging fruits, as I call it, and then be able to iterate on that and then improve moving forward. Cloud Centre of Excellence. This is really around building out your business strategy, finance, architects, etc., around really adopting that cloud strategy roadmap. Principle and standards, again, the same as setting up that early adoption, having those guardrails in place, looking at the architectural blueprints and patterns, and then being able to iterate on that. And experiment. So obviously, defining the key principles and standards around your guardrails, etc. That then allows you to, be able to experiment with all the amazing functions, features, etc. that AWS has to offer, but obviously within, a safe environment of the guardrails that you've put in place. Obviously around security, cost management, etc. And now this is a lot of these. When it comes to migrations, it's not just what I've learned, it's not just a technical component. It's not just about moving something from A to B or adopting a lot of cloud technologies. It's really a business transformation as well. And that's where the migration readiness assessment that AWS has really helps out. So, everyone knows that a lot of people who've done a lot of migration work or in the process of migrating or even thinking about migrating to AWS, the migration journey it's really 3 phases. Obviously starting off with your assess phase. So this is where you look at rapid discovery of what's on-premise. Whether you've got an on-prem, VMware environment that you're looking to migrate, looking at building out TCO reports, looking at readiness, etc., and then being able to build that case study to be able to, that migration case study. This is obviously the migration readiness assessment. Assessment is the key word. This is obviously happens at the assess stage. Then obviously, you look at the mobilization. This is where you start to set foundations and experience for the actual migration. So you're looking at building your AWS foundation, your landing zone, setting up your security and governance, etc., and then being able to build on top of that. Maybe picking a proof of concept migration workload, and then being able to build on that. And then it's all obviously in preparation for the migrate and modernize stage. So this is where you really start to use those lessons learned, those blueprints, etc., to then execute migration at scale. And then once you've executed that migration at scale, then obviously you've got the opportunity to then be able to modernize your workloads as well. So the migration readiness assessment, it's really, I suppose, understanding where your organization is when it comes to its cloud journey. It's identifying the strengths and weaknesses that your company or your business has when it comes to adopting the cloud, and then being able to build an action plan to be able to resolve and identify gaps. So the organisation can migrate, and obviously be able to, I suppose, cover off as many, with as less hassle as possible. I suppose the actual MRA it's based on the CAF, Cloud Adoption Framework. So you've got it covers off your 6 categories, obviously around business, people, governance, platform, security, operations. Typically, you would run a migration readiness assessment workshop. These would run, you sort of look at 2 half-day assessment workshops. Again, similar to, as mentioned previously, a well-architected review. You don't just want technical people involved. You also want your business stakeholders, finance, etc. So you can cover off all those different aspects. The migration readiness assessment it's made up of 70 questions, obviously around business capabilities, technical capabilities, outcomes, and potentially identifying any potential blockers obviously that might occur. Out of this, you kind of get, I suppose it's really, you think of it as a roadmap. I think of it as you wouldn't go on a car ride or a road trip without planning your route and planning your destination, etc. This is really what a migration readiness assessment helps you for. It's really planning. And I think the planning of your migration and your operational readiness and your cloud adoption is, if not more important than the actual migration itself. So out of the migration readiness assessment, you look at creating an action plan. The action plan is obviously looking at identifying, different gaps in potential areas, obviously around those six different aspects, and being able to work out a plan to then be able to close those gaps. And that's typically then done in your mobilization stage of your migration journey. I suppose, so this is an example of what what a migration, the MRA looks like. So you've got the tool. It's an online tool, again, similar to the WellArchitected review. Going through these questions, running these workshops. Out of this, you get the readiness assessment heat map. You also look at you also get sort of a 360 baseline view of across all your key areas: business, finance, program management, migration competency, cloud center of excellence, even your landing zone, your application discovery, security and operations. And it really helps to identify any gaps that may be there before you take your AWS, you start your full migration at scale. From there, obviously building that out, it's really, for me, I think, as I mentioned, the planning is most important. I've seen a lot of companies who have just gone, okay, well, I think, I just want to move from A to B. Let's just do it. They haven't really thought of, the business impact or the business opportunities. And I think the migration readiness assessment really helps to get customers on board, and also to help them to identify potential areas that need to be, I suppose, upskilled within their environment. And I think, to be honest, migration readiness assessment is critical in order to be able to perform a successful migration. So thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Caught me a little bit off guard there. That wrapped up really quickly. But that was very, very informative. Really grateful for you coming along and presenting that for us. Thank you very much. I believe we have Michaela up next. Michaela, if you're able to share your screen. Yep, that was quick. Here we go. All right. I'll just switch over to Michaela now.
Hey, so today I'm going to be talking about Lightsail, and we're going to be basically talking about Lightsail in reference to Sondhub, a little project that I run on, and a little bit of cursed infrastructure I've built around that to save on costs. So to start with, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of Sondhub and sort of weather balloons and what that all means to give you some context, and then we're going to dive into just some improvements we can do with Lightsail. So, some housekeeping first though. This isn't my professional work, so corners have been cut everywhere. The most important thing for me is the running cost, so that's what I focus on. But this means that I'm not under any sort of NDAs, so you can ask me any questions. Just put any questions into YouTube or Twitter or into the Slack, and after the talk I'll try and answer them. The other bit of housekeeping I want to do is around Amazon terms of services. Most of my talks don't start with a slide about terms of services, but I think this one is a little bit important if you go to run this in like a production environment where the stakes are a little bit higher than mine. I will prefix this with I'm not a lawyer, so this isn't any sort of legal advice, but my understanding is that if you read this term, it says you may not use Amazon Lightsail in a manner intended to avoid incurring data fees from other services. If you read the terms of services, when it says services, it's not referring to like your service. It means like things like S3 and CloudFront, and it gives a little example of that. But I thought I'd point that out just in case you go to implement some of these things. I just think it's important to sort of be clear that if you use this incorrectly, AWS might cut you off or, I don't know, send lawyers after you. So, Sondhub is all about tracking weather balloons. These balloons are massive. They're not your like party balloons. And they're filled with hydrogen, and that's the explodey one. It's not the helium you put in party balloons. At the bottom of the balloon is usually what we call a radio sonde or a sonde. It's payload for collecting weather data. So this is GPS position, temperature, humidity, pressure sensors. Sometimes you get things like ozone. Basically, scientists can run all sorts of experiments and launch them up into the atmosphere. So what Sondhub is sort of like Flight Radar 24. We have all these community receivers that are receiving radio sonde telemetry, and we feed that back to our server, process that, and then we distribute it all under like open data. This allows us to do cool stuff, like we can track the positions of weather balloons in real time, and we get a whole bunch of data. We can do all sorts of like really cool stuff with this data. It's all open. It's fun to play with. Definitely check it out. I'm going to focus on the real-time part of SondHub in this little quick talk. So how real-time works at the moment inside SondHub is basically the receivers, the radio receivers. They post things to Amazon API Gateway. That goes into SNS, that goes into Lambda, into Fargate, and then an application load balancer. Basically, that Fargate is running a Mosquito MQTT WebSocket server. Actual details aren't too specific for this talk, but this is basically what we're doing up until a couple of weeks ago. Now, the problem with this is we have expanded huge in the last couple of months. In the last 12 months, we've been onboarding so many new ground stations. And because we're processing all this live data, that adds up to a fairly significant amount of outbound traffic on our WebSockets. So just last month, we did 1.4 terabytes of external egress out of Amazon. And if you've managed AWS bills before, you can sort of understand that that's the most expensive data that you can have in AWS is sending stuff out. Now, we have patrons that support SondHub. However, that doesn't cover all of the AWS bill. So a lot of this lands on my credit card, unfortunately. So this makes me a little bit angry. So I thought I'd look into like, how can we cut these costs? So the thought process was kind of simple. It's like, well, AWS charges a lot for data. Could I use things like Volta or DigitalOcean or OVH? And my partner over there suggested, hey, doesn't like Lightsail compete with those? So I had a look at it, and it looks like there's a whole bunch of plans, and they have set amount of data transfer. And so if we have a look at this, the best value for money appears to be this $5 instance, which gives you 2 terabytes of data transfer. But a few warnings about this. Data transfer in Lightsail counts in both directions, inbound and outbound, is my understanding, compared to your typical EC2 where you're only charged for outbound traffic. The other gotcha is Lightsail uses its own AWS account, and its AZs are different from your AZs. So you need to use the metadata service to check the availability zone name, I believe it is. I always get the name and ID mixed up. But there's some other costs associated with using Lightsail. So you will need a load balancer. Luckily, load balancers, you don't get charged for data at that. So it's a fixed fee of $18, flat fee. You don't have to worry about it. But yeah, looking at this, it's a total cost of like 3 instances is about $15 plus the load balancer. You're looking at $33 for quite a few terabytes of outbound traffic. The other thing you need to consider, though, is that Lightsail doesn't have any auto-scaling mechanisms. You can probably script this, sure, but there's nothing built in. So in our case, we're just going to over-provision. We're just going to buy more instances than we think we need. And the other thing you need to think about is Lightsail load balance is very limited. So they only have like port 80 as the target traffic port, and port 443 and port 80 for the inbound. So let's do a quick comparison. We've got Fargate, like EC2 data cost, just the data cost, $184 for 2 terabytes. And Lightsail, we can get 6 terabytes, including 3 instances and 1 load balancer for $33. But it gets better. For a limited time only, Lightsail has a free tier that gives you the first 3 months on select instance types for free. So that actually brings the first 3 months down to $28, which is pretty cool. But how do you manage these instances? Tooling is quite limited. Terraform support for instances is there, but not for load balancers. Lightsail does support something similar to user scripts where you can put a startup script in there. But for SondHub, it's small enough that we can just manually provision the instances and forget about them. So this is what the console in Lightsail looks like. I've spun up 3 instances here, just manually. But how do I actually run code? Well, inside SondHub, we use ECS for a bunch of things. These are effectively EC2 instances. So can we run the ECS agent on them? Now, if we were to jump in and run ECS Anywhere, we'd get hit with a $7 per instance fee for running ECS Anywhere. But you can actually run ECS agent without ECS Anywhere. The one sort of gotcha with this is you have to remember that it's in a different AWS account. So you can't attach ENIs and you can't connect load balancers that are in your account. So you need to keep that in mind and remember that you have to use the Lightsail load balancer. So to use ECS, all we need to do is actually provision a ECS config. In here, we put like the cluster name, the default region, and I've just generated some static keys, IAM secrets from the SondHub account, stuck them in there, and then basically install the ECS agent by following the AWS docs for installing it on EC2. That's all you have to do, and once you do that, they'll show up in your ECS console. So then what do you do from there? So for us, because we're using Fargate, it meant that we needed to remove the load balancer. We needed to configure it for EC2. We didn't have memory and CPU limits set in our task definitions. And the other thing we had to do is set our ports. Now, remember how I said load balancers in Lightsail only support port 80 for the target? So basically just putting that mapping into the port 80. So then we add all our Lightsail instances to our Lightsail load balancer. And we provided a health check endpoint. And the health check is actually kind of important in this because we don't have any sort of auto scaling or unregistering or registering of containers to the load balancer. So we need to rely on the health check to sort of take a container in and out of service. So what does this all look like? Well, we end up with no more Fargate. We end up with Amazon Lightsail instances and a Lightsail load balancer. But from the client's point of view, nothing has changed. And from our point of view, in terms of deploying out new revisions of our software, nothing has changed because it's all ECS. It's all very simple and works. The only thing we lose out is auto scaling. So if we had a burst event, maybe someone runs an event that mentions us or someone popular tweets us, we might run into trouble there, but we're already over provisioned at least double or triple. The other great thing is because we're not running Fargate, we don't have those instances running. We've actually very over provisioned in terms of compute because we get that compute for free essentially. But the real results are in the price. So I've just put a cost explorer filter that's basically everything related to Fargate costs and data transfer out and Lightsail costs. And you can see that our price has essentially dropped from $3.44 a day down to $1.54 a day, which is a significant saving for us. That for something that essentially comes out of my wallet, that's a big deal for me. So I'm super pleased with how that turned out. But yeah, if you want to sort of know more about SondHub and how it works, or a little bit more information on RadioSond tracking, there's some links there. There's a donate page if you want to give me money, and our Patreon is full of a lot of technical details. So there's changes we've done on the front end, how we do RadioSond decoding, and also a whole bunch of AWS infrastructure notes. So things that we've done that are very specific to us, very special, or stuff that we find unique. There's a whole bunch of posts on our Patreon on how we manage our infrastructure. But yeah, thanks for listening. And just one shout out is the little fox stickers that you've seen in the presentation by CMY Cat Designs, in case you wanted to get your own. But yeah, that's all I have here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Michaela. Thank you very much, Michaela. Now that she can actually hear me. I think this is the second time you've told us about the SondHub stuff, and it's always really fascinating every time to to see just a different side of how technology is used. That was awesome. All right, Boyan, lucky last. If you could share your screen for me. All right, Boyan looks like he's ready to go with his overview of the CDK. We'll switch over to Boyan now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Boyan Živić, and I'll be going over CDK and what it really is. A bit of history on me. I work for CMD Solutions as a lead consultant, and as is probably evident in this lightning talk, I'm a bit crazy about CDK, and I'll show you why. So CDK, what really is it? I mean, most will consider it as some sort of programming language. It's a new infrastructure as code. But in reality, what it does, if we let the slide catch up, is it creates CloudFormation. CDK really provides a programmatic layer on top of CloudFormation. It gets rid of some of the headaches of CloudFormation. It improves on top of it, whilst retaining some of the benefits of CloudFormation. I know some of you might be like, hey, benefits of CloudFormation, I've always been Terraform, I've always been XYZ. Well, let me give you a bit of history. So CDK comes in many different flavors, so you can really kind of pick your language here. You can go either TypeScript, which is native, JavaScript, Python, Java, C#, and as of December, thank you, reInvent, Go. So for any of you Gophers out there or anyone who's using Go, more than happy to actually create CDK for that now too. In the presentation, most of the examples will be in TypeScript with a couple in Python. And a bit of history on why I've brought both CDK in Python and in TypeScript to production. So a bit of general history on CDK. Let the slide catch up. Generally available as of July 11th, 2019. That was CDK version 1. There was an early developer preview, which some of us got to test on. Great improvements since, obviously. It is a programmatic layer generating CloudFormation templates and managing assets. We've highlighted assets for a very important reason, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. And allows for object-oriented programming infrastructure as code. Bit of a mouthful. And as mentioned, it's available in TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, Java, C#, and Go. Through the usage of something called JSII. And that's really the main component what makes CDK so special. So what is JSII? Well, it's an open source tool created by AWS to interact with JavaScript libraries. So basically, if I in TypeScript create a custom construct and I invoke JSII, I can actually share that to Python. I can share that to Java. I can share that to C# or any of the other languages that support CDK. So it provides essentially a polyglot library for creating infrastructure as code. And whatever you're comfortable with, you can simply use it to interact. They do have more on their GitHub IO for JSII, and it is constantly being developed. So we'll leave that there. So CDK assets, this is a really important one. What CDK does well is it allows you to manage your, shall we say, your code for your Lambda, your Docker images, any really files that you have to wrap up and zip up and push out through to AWS during deployment by using a single command. So in your code, if you reference, for example, a Docker file for your task def, or let's just say if you're one of the few using code deploy, that you're mentioning a new Docker file to actually push out, and you mentioned the repo as well, it'll do the Docker build for you, it'll do the versioning, and it'll push it out using one command. So it reduces how much you actually have to write into it. And in the case of Lambda, it'll actually, depending on, for example, if you've done it inline, hopefully not, if you've chosen a file directory where your code lives, you can actually push said code up to AWS without having to actually specify it elsewhere. You don't have to do a CloudFormation package. You don't have to do anything else like that. It's all done in the background. So breakdown of CDK. From a level of what we're really going to be focusing on today, we'll be focusing on apps, stacks, and constructs. And they basically make up about 90% of what CDK is. The rest, environments, resources, identifiers, tokens, parameters, and tagging, and also escape hatches, although not listed there, are, shall we say, things that feed into CDK and enhance the features. But as the nature of a lightning talk, we're going to focus on getting this done relatively quickly. So CDK, much like onions, common layers. You have your app that imports your stack that imports your constructs, and constructs where your modules kind of come in. The idea is, and the word stack that I keep on using is used in the same iteration as the CloudFormation stack. What you put into your CloudFormation stack, or rather in this case, CDK stack, will also what will be created from the CloudFormation stack side. So easy association there. So how does the app look like? Well, the app is really just a file where you import all your stacks. So after you pick your poison of your language, in this case Python or TypeScript, you can simply import your stack file into your line of work. And the best part is you can copy that multiple times. So here we have, for example, under TypeScript, new comment stack. Well, we can call that comment stack a couple of times and just change, for example, an environment name, as is the dynamic variable here, or infra stack, and it'll create a completely new CloudFormation stack for you. It provides reusability. But typically when it comes to reusability, we want to focus on something called custom constructs or patterns. So the app breakdown, and I will immediately say I have generously borrowed this from the AWS documentation. This is basically how CDK uses the app to actually break down and deploy, as well as construct the code that you've created into CloudFormation and into CDK. The first step is construct. Basically, it'll take all the code that you've done and it will start compiling and linking. The preparation stage, where it'll actually start associating tokens, and tokens are essentially temporary placeholders that are basically pulling across values from, let's just say, for example, if you're referencing SSM, if you're referencing another stack, if you're doing a lookup to existing resources as well. CDK actually gives you the ability to interact with existing resources, as well as dynamically, that is. And then it'll validate everything. So that's the stage we'll go through going, for example, if you've set a string value for a numeric value, or if you set a Boolean for something, instead you put a string, it'll actually do validation for you, as well as doing strongly typed values. So for example, when a value is expecting a EC2 instance type, and you've put the number 1, at that point it'll say, with good reason, here's the issue, here's where you've gone wrong, here's what you need to do. So it kind of checks for human error, which is great. And the last step, which is synthesize, where what will happen is everything will be compiled and then a CloudFormation template will be created. And from that, CDK deploy. In those steps as well, during the prepare stage is when your assets get wrapped up as well. So stacks, that's the next one. This is with the unit of deployment. Essentially, the stack is like a CloudFormation stack, very similar in the sense that it has the same sort of limitations as well. As we know, resource name limits, specifically resource limits that you set as well inside of the CloudFormation stack. You can't pass a certain amount. And the example provided there, we've got a TypeScript example and Python. Now, the reason why I'm putting these two straight away copied from my IDE is that if you're a person coming from, say, Python, and you've done Python CDK before, going into TypeScript, it won't be as daunting of an experience, having personally done that myself, going Python to TypeScript, because the similarities are all there. The constructor has changed into def. We both use a super here, and the classes are still being called. Some of the differences obviously remain because obviously we're going across different languages, but the beauty is, though, to the, shall we say, trained CDK eye, you can pick up on the similarities. So progressing across multiple languages can be something quite comforting and quite quick. And just a quick little image, you can have multiple stacks and multiple resources inside of the app. So you're not limited just to one stack, just as a quick heads up. So moving on, level 1 constructs. So we've gone from app, we've gone from the stack portion, and now we're moving on to the constructs portion. So the level 1 constructs are really what CloudFormation is essentially in a CDK form. It's one-to-one. So what you can see here, for example, we've created a bucket and with the name of low-level bucket, I'm sure that name's taken, and a EC2 instance. And they'll go one-to-one with the exception of adding metadata to create a CloudFormation template. It's relatively very simple. But it doesn't mean that just because it's a really simple and level 1 construct that we can't do some pretty interesting things with it. L1 constructs in the IDE. We can use that low-level bucket that we created to add a dependency from one line. We can overwrite basics. We can add metadata. We can even use something called an escape hatch, which allows you to actually change and modify the underlying CloudFormation underneath as well. So if you want to start throwing in some JSON to clean up some things that, for example, you didn't want to have, you can do that too. Now onto the interesting stuff. So Level 2 constructs really are what provide the method-based performance that a CloudFormation, or rather the CloudFormation resource lacks, for example. CloudFormation is just a template. It will have this, this, and this. At no point can you do what you can do in CDK, for example, where, for example, if I were to say, if production environment, add a lifecycle rule to this bucket, or add a retention policy, or add a specific image to my Fargate task definition. Once you use something like an L2 construct, you can do that programmatically. And in the next example, what an L2 construct can actually do, beyond just going L1 and L2, sorry, add bucket life policy, etc., it bundles together multiple, for example, services, resources inside of AWS to create many. So from about, I would say about 14 lines of TypeScript there, because we haven't mentioned the VPC, we create a VPC. We create a set of subnets, and by default, it's 2 subnets, 2 private. We'll create a task definition, an ALB, a target group, a security group, and a default IAM role, and so on and so forth. And that actually creates well over 400 lines of CloudFormation. And I think we can all agree 14 lines of code compared to 400, that's a big difference. And in the demo I'll show at the end, I'll give you an example of that and just how it looks like. So with level 2 constructs, as I mentioned, you can actually expand on that. And you can actually do a fair few things with it. Here I have something called a function, which I named this function, which is actually my Lambda function. And with the Lambda function, I can actually add a role policy to it. Now, the best part is when you hover over the ability of any of those things, for example, in this case, add to role policy, it'll actually give you an instruction on what you're doing, and it'll give you the statement you need to inject. So for example, it's saying it needs a statement, and it needs to be of the type policy statement. So I know that's in Lambda, and I can go lambda.policy statement, and it'll give you more details. The best part is when you're using something like CloudFormation, you may have something like a extension in your IDE to help you fill it in. But because this is native TypeScript in this case, and thankfully AWS has done some very due diligent work to actually give you the documentation pretty much built into your IDE. Yes, you'll probably still have to go to their own doco, but it's a nice feature to have. Custom constructs. Now, we saw earlier the application load balance Fargate service, and that's something that AWS actually gave to us as part of something called ECS patterns. But we can create our own. So, for example, let's just say you've used Terraform, you've used the modules where you can reuse code in Terraform modules, right? In the same sort of concept, you can apply that with CDK as well. Here I've got one which I had to hide some company secrets, couldn't show my L1 and L2 constructs that made it. But just by using an export, I can then create my own, for example, Aurora cluster with all my defaults. I can have, for example, encryption at rest enabled as standard. I can have, for example, encryption in transit enabled as standard. I can have, for example, RDS proxy added in, and so on and so forth. And as those defaults kind of come about, I can reuse this construct elsewhere as well. And because this is TypeScript, I can then wrap that up. I can create an NPM package if I wanted to, and push that out to registry. I don't have to have a copy paste of this everywhere. Anytime I need it, I can go npm install Boyan's constructs and go boom, get a Aurora cluster at any given point. And much like the one we saw earlier, we wouldn't have to call 30, 40, 50 different lines. We just have to go new Aurora construct, or cluster in this case, to make it. So in the custom constructs and patterns, you can actually edit what's within. So excuse the poor copy paste. Clearly, Google Docs didn't like my last copy paste there. But what you can actually do inside of this load balanced Fargate service that we have here, we can actually expand that and, for example, look for the target group. And within that target group, we can actually then set what the health check is, or whatever else you can actually do in a target group. You can look for what do you call it, specific ports you want to target. But you can also go to security group. You can also go to the VPC. You can also go to the load balancer. Anything that's present within the custom construct can be edited within your actual code. And it's basically like a ever-expanding sort of resource. The main resource is the load balance service. From that, I'm getting the target group. And from that, I'm setting a feature I want to add to it. So it's very feature rich. It really gives you a lot you can do with a little amount of code. And the programmatic approach. So this is an example of a EFS and a data sync construct we made. And I've taken a small portion out of it. And what we actually had to do, we had to set mount points for it. But this is for each and every subnet. But instead of actually having to set mount points for this one at a time, copy, paste, it just looks ugly and it's hard to read. We did a for each loop where we said for every subnet, give me the subnet IDs. And then for each subnet, we'll give it a value of subnet as a string, do a mount point. And after that, it'll go through, it'll run through each one, and it'll actually add the mount point, add the attachment, and really just give a small amount of code to read that really does a lot. Each and every one of those mount points will create about 8 to 10 different lines of CloudFormation. And again, 30 lines of CloudFormation amongst the other 500 aren't exactly easy to read. So this really gives us a nice clean view. So continuing on with that. Here we have, for example, environments. In your app, it's not just limited to your stacks, by the way, or constructs. You can set a switch statement where it's looking for an environment name. And based upon environment name, it'll only deploy certain stacks. So you're not limited to just, for example, setting whatever the retention policy is. You can actually clarify what stacks will be deployed when. And this actually blocks human error as well to an extent. Because whenever you're running a CDK deploy, you're specifying that when I'm running a production deploy, I'll only deploy these stacks. So you won't have to worry about, for example, someone deploying a incredibly expensive ML stack or an EKS cluster where they shouldn't. You can limit it to having that ability to block it off in your apps. So how does it all work? Well, demo time. Okay, let's cancel my screen share for a moment and share my IDE. Let's have a look. Okay. Sorry, Rob, if I've got you doing double duties here. Just want to see if that comes up. Absolutely. Okay. Sorry, guys. This might be a little bit hard to see, but let's use some CDK to get ready. So first thing we want to do, we want to do a CDK init to initialize, and we can pick our language. So we are going to go with TypeScript. All right. It'll go through and it'll set up our packages.json, our package lock. It'll even give us a test framework. So basically we get to use Jest and it'll start preparing everything. So I'll give that a moment. Okay. It's going through, it's pulling all the constructs. Now, as one note, what I like, they give you a ignore for Git as well, because they're assuming you're going to push this to repo. And the first thing that ignores is your node modules. Let's be honest, no one wants to push a node module folder to Git because it's probably going to take up a lot of space and just be unnecessary. So, all right, we've created the initialization. Let's run it through super quickly. At the top end, in your bin, there's your app. It'll actually give you a bit of information on what you can do with it. In this case, it's saying that if you want to uncomment the next line, whatever you set in your AWS config here, it'll use that to deploy out your application. In your lib, we have our stack. And in our stack as well, again, if you're new to it, if you've just initialized for the first time, it actually gives an example on how to make something. So it really does simplify it for you. But rather than talking about the examples that they create from the CDK init, let's make our own. Okay, what we're going to do here, let's go make a bucket. So we know we talked about imports. Import, let's have a look as S3 from, and again, autocorrect. You've got to love it. AWS-CDK. We'll go to look for a lib, and AWS- as you can see everything here, S3. All right, great. Now let's get rid of some of this unnecessary stuff here. We'll go constant. We want a low bucket, and we'll call it new. So you do new every time you're going to create a new resource. S3.bucket, and then it requires some basics. Scope means where are you going to be deploying this? We're going to deploy it to this stack. We're going to give it a resource name of test Voyance bucket. Please deploy, because obviously bucket naming. And from there, you pass on something called properties. Anytime you see properties, it's basically just funky brackets like these that just want, for example, a bucket name. But we have a question mark there. And in TypeScript, that means you don't really have to use this, because when you're creating a bucket, technically you don't need to specify anything. But in this case, let's see what we can specify. So using the magic of IntelliSense and things being done for us, we're going to go control space. Let's have a look. We can add access controls, auto bucket deletes. But in this case, I'm just going to give it a bucket name. Cool. This will create a bucket and it'll give it a physical name. It didn't give us a recommendation of not to do it, but we will. And we'll go Boyan's working bucket 23, because you never know if it's going to work. From here, let's go ahead and we're going to create that giant import that we did earlier. So we're going to go import star. So star means everything as AWS-pattern from, now again, we're going to go AWS CDK -lib, and we're going to look for specifically the AWS ECS. And what did I mess up here? Yep, can't use touch. We'll go back, control space. We want the patterns. Now, I think we remember the name of that one. It was a bit of a mouthful. It was the Fargate load balance service. Let's see if we can find that. We're in a constant. We're going to name it our service. We'll go new, and we're going to go AWS pattern dot control space. Gotta love it. Here we are. Application load balance Fargate service. And we're going to do the same thing we did earlier. We're going to say this, and we want this service, again, just to give it a resource name. And from that, we're going to give it some properties. Now, with the properties on this one, it will actually work it out for you when you do the control space and actually tell you what you can use. So we can use publicly assigned IP certificates. We can give it domain names, enable ECS tags, what we want to set the load balancer to, if we want to assign it to an existing load balancer, and a fair few options. But for this one, we're going to keep it simple. So let's pull that up and get that ready. Okay. So what we want to add here, we want to make it, do we want a public load balancer? Yes, we do. And how do I know this is Boolean? If we scroll over, it'll tell it. So very simple. Determines whether the load balancer is public. We want a VPC. Well, if we don't include a VPC, what happens? If it's not there, it will actually create one for you. Well, that's nice. Let's let it make a VPC for us. Task image options. Well, we just want to use Nginx for the demo, right? All right. How do I know to use these squiggly brackets? It'll actually tell us there as well. So anytime you have anything defined as task image options, etc., it's referring to these snake brackets, funky brackets, call them whatever you'd like. And what are the options available here? We know we only need image. Okay, so we're going to get image, ECS, and we want to, whoop, not that one. Thank you, autocorrect. We'll pull in ECS because we need ECS. Specifically, we need the container image. Container image. And again, this is the beauty of the IDE. If you're missing something or if you've forgotten something, just like me, it'll actually fill it in for you. And we want from registry. Now you can go ECR registry as well if you have it locally. So we want from registry, which will go default to Docker Hub. We want specifically something called Nginx. And how do we know this is going to work? References an image on Docker Hub or any other online registry. You can go Key and the others as well, but for the sake of the demo, let's go Docker Hub. We're going to set up some basic memory limits. Let's go 512 meg, and we want to listen a port of 80 being incredibly unsecure. Okay, now let's see if we can convert that to CloudFormation, shall we? 27 lines, including all the imports. So we're going to clear that. We're going to go CDK list just to see if it's going to be able to give us a list of things we've done. Going to give us some time because it's compiling, and it's created a new folder for us called CDK out. And what that is, gives us a manifest, gives us something called the assets that are associated to it, and then it looks at the template in CloudFormation in JSON. But we don't want JSON, so we want to actually synthesize all this, right? In this case, it's this part here. And I'm going to quickly save this too. So we can do CDK synth. And what we're going to do now, we want to send the stack we have into a template.yaml. Let's see how that looks. Hopefully the demo gods are good to me and everything works great. Taking a bit of time, but that's probably a good thing. Okay, couldn't take credentials, but that's okay. Let's have a look at that, how that template looks anyway once it's done. Right. That's a lot of CloudFormation. That's a lot of CloudFormation. Setting the load balancer up, setting up the security group ingress. We've got, if I can keep scrolling, with IAM role, ECS Fargate task. Here's the memory limit we've set. We've got 535 lines of CloudFormation. Created from about 27 lines of TypeScript. That's pretty good. I've got to admit, it's not bad. And as any of us know, working with a small code base does make life easy. And if I wanted to change something, like our Fargate service here, right? And if I wanted to say, I want to look at the cluster that it's on. And from the cluster, I'll go, well, I want to see what the actual cluster name is. I can call that at any given point, and I'll tell you what the value is. Or from the load balancer, I wanted to, for example, add a new listener. Just mess with it. Add HTTPS instead. I can. And that's the beauty of CDK. And that extremely quick talking talk really is a big proof of how much effort is really put into it and how much love AWS has actually put behind their product, which they really have. And how an IDE really does make these things easier. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for your time today. And for those who have really paid attention, thank you very much.
Thank you, Boyan. That was as informative as ever. I really wish they had a Swift language for CDK. I'm sure I could actually go and submit one to the JS2 initiative. I think that would be an interesting, if maybe futile, use of my time. But, you know, yeah, I don't have that much free time at the moment, unfortunately. I'm good with Go, so that's fine. I'll stick with Go. All right, a big thank you as well to our rest of our speakers tonight, to Michaela, to Jason, and to James. Let's wrap up for the evening. Again, I'm going the wrong way. So our next event, hopefully, will be back in person. Keep an eye on Slack and on Twitter. As soon as we know exactly where we're going to be and when, we will post it on there. So that should, in theory, be the last Wednesday of the month. But we would really like to be back in person and not doing these virtually again next time. So we may adjust the date a little bit, but we'll see how we go. A big thank you again to CMD, to Versant, and to Civo. I noticed there were quite a few of our presenters tonight affiliated with our sponsors. A big thank you to those guys and to those who weren't affiliated with our sponsors as well. Like as we said, this is a community by the community for the community, so it's always great when we put a call out for speakers and we get so many volunteers come back to help out. So thank you to everybody. So I don't think we're going to do a Zoom tonight. I believe we've lost a lot of people due to family commitments and other events that are on this evening, so we'll probably skip this one. But we'll see you next month, hopefully back in person, hopefully with free beer and pizza, and we'll see how we go. Thank you very much for watching tonight. We'll see you next month.